The information that would come through sometimes will often have more than one stream of direction that we can play with because there's multiple probabilities that are presenting. And the reason why those are coming in is because in this present moment, those have the most energetic attention drawing towards them. So if I'm sharing with someone that this is a possibility of what they might be merging into, it's just because there's a lot more energy in that direction at this moment than another direction. But there might be 3 different lines that are possible for them in that present moment. Hi there, I'm Heather Ivany, and I'm on your Superior Self podcast.
Yes, you are, Heather. Thank you so much for dropping in with me today.
Honored to be with you.
I am just so excited to talk about your experiences and your reality in general. But before we do that, let's give some listeners and audience, watchers on YouTube, some context. How do you, Heather, experience this reality?
Depends on the day, I'll say that. Sometimes I feel like I'm more condensed and attending to the human parts that take place in this reality. And sometimes I'm more in an effervescent space and connecting to consciousness. But I think more and more what I'm playing with is the ability to blend both and not be taking the hat on and off all the time. So allowing the human experience that we're having to have more conscious filled moments and to allow the conscious filled moments to be relatable to the human experience.
Beautiful. So have you always been this aware of consciousness in general, and or the work that you do is very deep and meaningful? I've had a session with you and just, had a conversation, and it was very deep and meaningful for me. And I just want to know, like, how did it start for you? Like, what did it look like 10, 15 years ago? Like, were you this mindful? Like, were you drawn into the play, the drama, the matrix? Like, what did that look like?
I think I've always kind of hung on the edges of the matrix. I'm a youngest of 3 and I have 2 older brothers. So I think when you enter into this world from that angle, you watch a lot. And so I was able to watch a lot of what my brothers were doing, how my parents were parenting, and just asking myself, is this what I want? Is this the direction that I want to go to? So I've naturally been by nature kind of a critical thinker growing up. I also grew up in a very suburban upbringing in Alberta, Canada. So in that environment, I never quite felt like I fit in fully. So I was always curious about the pockets where I did feel at home, and oftentimes it was in the mountains, it was in nature, it was around lakes and rivers. And so me wanting to have a lifestyle that included that meant for me that I had to sort of think outside of the box as to what was possible and what I could do. By nature, I've always enjoyed a meaningful conversation. Even with girlfriends in high school, I remember smoking cigarettes in my basement, listening to music, having a few drinks, and we'd just get into some really philosophical conversations. And then we'd try and take it into the boys' club when we would meet up with them later. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But it's always been my nature to kind of go beyond the surface level. And even I find that in the years that I'm in right now, like my circles are smaller than probably most people. And a lot of that has to do with the challenge I find with just the everyday chit chat that we kind of do at sporting events and school drop-offs and stuff. I can do it, but it's quite exhausting for me, to be honest.
That's interesting, right? Like, to have a deep, meaningful conversation about philosophical, esoteric material is less on you than going up and having a surface level conversation. I find that fascinating, right? Like, because the deeper you go, right, I feel like you're being energized anyway. Like, the deeper you go in a conversation and really getting to know the person at an energetic level, just where they're at and how they perceive reality and where they're at energetically, just by their personal philosophy. Like, I feel like you're getting energized by that, and then you just kind of flow, like ebb and flow in the conversation. Like, when you and I have a conversation, I feel like we're in a flow state where it's just timelessness, right?
Yeah.
And the deeper we dive into that conversation, the more like energetic I feel. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you get the same or not, but
Yeah, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think a part of it for myself is, if I was to sort of put the eye on it a bit more, when the conversation's more surface level, I think there's more balls in the air that are kind of managing myself as to how to prostrate and appear and doing it right or doing it wrong. Whereas the moment you can drop into something that has more of a connection to it, then all of sort of the fronts that we put on, the masks and the ways that we hold ourselves, those just kind of are given permission to fall away. And so we relax into it and it feels like less efforting, if you will.
Less efforting for sure. I think I feel the same way. Like when I just, it's like we put on these masks that we wear in society, and like we play a role. When I have a conversation with someone over here, I got to wear this mask, and so like wearing the mask is draining me of energy. And then when I have a conversation over here, it's like totally different. So like it's almost like you're splintering yourself, your total self, into these little silos in which you have to have a conversation or present yourself as a certain image, and like that's just energy draining in itself. And then it's just not, you're not being most authentic that you can. But then again, I can't walk up to someone and start talking about the Akashic records. You know what I mean? Like I can't.
Yeah.
Some people don't have the capacity to, for one, understand what that is, and then two, to really like be open to those these messages and or energetic transmissions that you receive from that field, and being able to decipher and filter for us to kind of lead us a little bit down that path. But why don't you talk about that? Like, how did you get into the Akashic field, Akashic records, the journey of exploring those, and then being comfortable enough to draw from that and have clients, and coach them through that process?
So for me, I reached sort of a point in the teaching of yoga. So I was a yoga teacher I still am, but it was about close to 20 years in. And I was reaching a point where I was just really craving more depth, more getting to know someone in a larger environment than what sort of an hour practice can provide for the amount that I can get to know people. And even the teacher trainings that I would lead were starting to feel limited because there's a bit of a curriculum that you have to follow when you're leading those types of offerings. And I wanted to be teaching outside of the curriculum. So that was the initial awareness, was just that I was longing to be in different environments with people, deeper conversations, and in a way that actually has purpose. Not purpose, but it's applicable. So for me, the conscious realm, it's lovely to dance and do so many things in it, but if it's not practical to what we're doing in this earthly plane, if it's not relatable, it's hard for me to really engage with it and get on board with it. So that was the initial plug. And then from there, it was a series of different circumstances. Part of it was shut down, studios were closed. It gave me opportunity to really reflect on what it is that I want to be doing. From there, I just happened to have an Akashic reading with someone who shared with me in the reading that I was already working with the Akashic records, just not on a conscious level. And if I was curious and wanted to explore that, that was available to me. So I just did that. I moved through, there's sort of three parts to learning how to read the Akashic records. Part one is learning how to read them for yourself. And then part two is how to read them for others. And then part three is expanding it into the bigger field. So you can go into the Akashic records of a business or a plant or another planet or animals. It's kind of the sky's the limit. So once I moved through those three planes, those three parts, within 4 months afterwards, I was being asked to lead other people in how to learn how to read the records. So it was very organic, very easeful. It moved quite quickly. And where I'm at right now, it's just interesting. I kind of wanted out of the yoga container, in the sense that the only people that were really able to work with me were people that were yogis. And I just wanted to be able to tap into the larger population of people that don't do yoga, but they're still interested in having a connection with consciousness. So I moved into the container of the Akashic records. And what I'm noticing even now, it's almost like this constant you build it up and burn it down and build it up and burn it down. Because where I'm at right now is like, oh, I'm watching myself put myself in another box of being an Akashic record teacher. And fundamentally, what I want to be doing is just having really fascinating conversations on how to connect to consciousness, how to expand our essence through the relationship to consciousness. And that's not confined to the Akashic records, but people need ability to be able to access and find. And so that's the way that people find me is by wanting to learn about the Akashic records. But once we're in the training, we go rogue a lot, and it's a lot of fun.
What else do you think you're tapping into? Like if it's outside the Akashic field or Akashic records container, like what do you think you're tapping into?
I think it's just, what I mean by that is it doesn't have to be like, someone doesn't have to want to read the Akashic records to want to connect more meaningful with consciousness. And I think that's sort of where I'm trying to broaden out to now. So anyone that wants to be in deeper relationship with themselves and how they relate to the field of consciousness, that's the information and the support that I like to provide with people. So someone might come into an Akashic training because they want to develop and curate and expand their intuition, and not necessarily be a guide for helping other people read the Akashic records. That's what I mean by it. Yeah, it's confining.
So how can people like benefit from a reading, right? Like I know you and I had a reading and it seemed like you were hitting on a lot of different areas that I resonate with, but like outside of myself and in generality, how does it help people mostly? Like it's just seeing what's next to come? Is it like different areas of their lives, either like, relationships, career, that kind of thing?
It depends on the practitioner that people are doing a reading with. So some people will use the Akashic records and they do past life regressions, if you're familiar with that, just going into people's previous past lives and gaining information from there. Some people will work with trauma with the Akashic records, so supporting people with clearing energetically and releasing traumas that they have. How I personally work with the records is I love to support people in their own becoming. So what is the part of them that wants more attention, more opportunity to grow and expand, and be more in their essence of their authentic nature? So sometimes I'm supporting people with just identifying what their essence is, meaning like, how do they want to be showing, how does their essence want to be expressing in this lifetime? And sometimes people are coming in and they're really aware of that, but they're not quite sure how to expand and grow into the next becoming that they're moving into. So I support stages with that with individuals. So primarily, if people are booking a session with me, we're going to work in the present moment. That's really important to me. So we're definitely in the now, and we're aligning with and expanding our own essence.
I think it's so fascinating because it's like the Akashic is the field that contains everything that you've ever been, right? Or all the information that you've ever, like the totality of your being, essentially. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's if you hone it into your specific Akashic records, that's a perfect way to describe it. But then if you expand it out into Akasha is a Sanskrit word that translates to space or spirit. So if you're more quantum physics, science-based, quantum physics is the study of everything, and space is a part of everything. So that's how the Akasha kind of links into quantum physics. And then if you're more spiritually based, it's Akasha translates to spirit. And so it's the field of consciousness. So the bigger Akasha is consciousness or space. But then when I'm honing into your specific Akashic records, absolutely, it's like the divine blueprint of your soul.
So is it like the future probabilities of these, or the lives that the life that I'm living now? Is it like the timelines that you could see, like, as far as where I'm heading, or like, is it more or less like, all right, you're becoming this, right? Like, so I'm giving you the tools or the information now that you need to help you along that path of becoming. Does that make sense? So is it already preset, or is it like you're giving me the tools to become that?
A little bit of both. So how I sort of play with future probability is just that it's possibility and probability. So if someone's asking a future-based question, The information that would come through sometimes will often have more than one stream of direction that we can play with because there's multiple probabilities that are presenting. And the reason why those are coming in is because in this present moment, those have the most energetic attention drawing towards them. So if I'm sharing with someone that this is a possibility of what they might be merging into, it's just because there's a lot more energy in that direction at this moment than another direction. But there might be 3 different lines that are possible for them in that present moment. But then even just confirming or exposing someone's essence in the present moment gives them a lot of data on how to move with it in the future, right? And then if I go into past at all, it's usually because we're pulling either like a wisdom, we're usually pulling a wisdom teaching from that past life and moving it into present moment and giving ourselves information as to how to work with it and apply it. So for example, if someone's playing with, wanting more financial abundance, for example, we can go into a past life where they've actually been living that experience and we can see what they did in that lifetime that can support them in present moment, and we can pull that line of energy into present moment. Or we can go into the future version of them that actually is already living in that abundance and see from there what was the starting point. What were you doing in this present time that started to get you into the trajectory of being able to have that possibility available to you? And so we'll pull it from the future into present moment too.
Have you ever had clients where like, yeah, they were wanting or being pulled towards abundance or wanting freedom, and then the Akashic records just didn't have that in the cards for them? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think this is going to happen for you, bro. Like, this isn't like, I'm not seeing this. Like, I feel like a lot of the times people will have like a really amazing session with someone who's either a psychic or someone who's reading the field. So I always wonder if it's like them actually seeing these probabilities or timelines, or if it's just the information that they're receiving and then creating a belief, and that belief is actually what's collapsing that timeline, if that makes sense.
Oh, it's really cool. Great question. And yes, I would agree with what you're saying. And the other part to answer, oftentimes, and I'll do this when I'm teaching people how to read the records as well. So someone can come into a session and they have a specific question that they're asking, and I can't get a handle on the answer to their question. So for me, and this is where I think a lot of people get tripped up, even in their meditations. If they're in a meditation and they're wanting to pitch a question to source and just see what bounces back at them. When things go radio silent, we're so quick to assume that we've done something wrong and that somehow we're being denied access to the information that we're wanting. And I just play with it in different ways. So initially, I'll check in with how we're asking the question and is it clear? So sometimes when we're asking a question, there can be 2 or 3 questions that are in that one question. So we might just need to tease it apart a little bit and ask the question in smaller chunks. And if I'm being as clear as I possibly can get, and there's still 0 information coming in for me, then how I receive that is that this is not where we're meant to be focusing our attention at this time. And let's work with what is naturally flowing in and the information that's coming, and let's just change our course of action a little bit and go here. So I have to be willing to be okay with disappointing the expectation that people come in with. I've never felt, even in the yoga realm, like part of my role as a teacher is to rub up against the friction a little bit with students so that they can not always feel growth and expansion from the pleasure, but also feeling it from the grit a little bit. So that's something that I've just pulled forward from being a yoga teacher, is just the comfortableness with someone not being comfortable with where a session is going. But that doesn't mean that if they were to book, 3 months or 6 months down the road and ask the same questions again, if it might come through more clearly, just because now it's in a better place of receivership, if that makes sense. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Does that answer what you're asking there?
Yeah, for sure. I think it reminds me of, like, I don't know, I was reading this book about this Native American medicine man who was telling a story about the individuals that would come and do a rain dance for the people that lived in a certain area because there was just no rain, there was drought, right? So the rain man would come and do a dance, and then it would rain, right? However, his perspective was it wasn't the man doing the rain dance and then fixing the environment. It was more or less like the man doing a rain dance and fixing the people, right? So getting them in vibration with the land in order for something to happen. I feel like that's kind of like what you're talking to. It's like, all right, so I'm asking these questions, these different perspectives from where you're at now in the present moment. I'm hearing nothing. 6 months from now, you may change energetically, or your momentum or your energetic field or something changes in you to where now you're resonating with that future probability, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
I just love that story. I don't know why I keep telling it. Like the Rain Man, they're doing the dance. I think it's just so different. Like, I don't know. The perspective changed. I was like, all right. So when I was reading it, I've always thought that an indigenous leader would come in and would change something to the land or the environment, and that would create it. But in essence, he was being the change agent and changing the people's vibration, which got them more resonant with the land, which allowed for rain to come. And I just thought that was so fascinating and so true, because I could see it in examples in my life. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a teacher that says what you're saying in a different way. She says, when we pray, we don't pray for things to change. We pray that the person praying can be changed.
I feel like everything is just the process of becoming something different, right? Like everything. If I think about my entire life and just where I'm at today, it's like a process of changing. And like, I can't even relate to the person that I was 10 years ago because I'm not at the same level, you know? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure you probably feel the same way about yourself, but like, as you grow, like, there's something about the process, you know, I feel like you gotta love the process of change. I don't know.
Well, and you can't get away from it. Like, I remember having a conversation recently just about, so what I'm playing with a lot lately is identifying the places within myself where I hold hierarchy with contrast. So, I'll favor one side of the spectrum over the other, and then I'll just let myself kind of see if I can get to a place where I can hold both in equal reverence, because essentially one can't live without the other. But what I was noticing in that process was when I start to move into what we would call the apparent negative components, the moment that I shine my light in the direction of, it changes. And so I hope I can keep the listeners tracking with me here, but what I was getting tripped up with was when I was sharing it with the teacher that I was working with, is I was like, I want to be able to look at the dark and have my light on it without changing it to be better in order for it to merge closer to the light. And her response was, you can't, everything is always changing at all moments of time. And all that's happening when you place your awareness on it is you're becoming aware of the change that's happening. So if you take it in the other direction, and let's say you're aware of a light-filled moment that you're experiencing, the moment you place your attention on it and start to watch it, it too is changing. But we're more comfortable with it because it feels like a light energy is changing a light energy. And so it feels more accepted. And so it just kind of created a little bit of equanimity within me, just to be able to see that you can't even look at something. The moment, it's like placing your attention on the breath and trying not to change the breath. It's not that and the breath will organically just start to shift and adjust, not because you're mechanically manipulating it, but because you're placing your awareness on it, and that too has influence on it. So try and experience something without it changing. It's not possible, because that's just the way that energy works.
It's so beautiful. I love that. I think, yeah, I mean, I become so obsessed with trying to control things, you know, different variables, manipulation, algorithms, things like that, and thinking that I can make something better. But it's like, I don't know, it's so anxiety filled for me. Like,
Right.
when you know what I mean? Like when I'm going through those steps of like really trying to like control the variables, And so like, I don't know. It seems like when I can step back, and they call it like 5D awareness. I don't know what that means, like 5D, like where
You know?
you're, like where you just have a different consciousness about things. Like you just, when you're so in fear and so anxious filled and trying to control the variables, like you're in this different state of consciousness, like fear-based consciousness and scarcity. Like when you're in this more of a abundant consciousness and more confident in what you're doing, then it seems like as you step back and just allow things happen on their own without you having to, like to your point, like you're not even having to control anything. It just, if that makes sense. I don't know. I went a little bit of rant there, but like.
Well, you're speaking to a topic that's really on my heart as of late is, so play along with me for a little bit. So the part of ourselves that wants to control, and I'll put two other parts in there. The part of us that controls, the part of us that loves to know, and the part of ourselves that likes to manipulate. Okay, those are kind of the three components of, let's just categorize that into the ego-based energy. And then the three components that help to grow and expand our essence would be our innocence, our wildness, and our mystic. And so when you're in the space of controlling, this is a very human quality. It's innocent in its nature, meaning try not to control at all in life. It's pretty hard to do. There's a natural part of ourselves that wants to control. It's how the ego keeps us safe. So it's not so much that we're trying to squash or squish the controller, rather adding more essence into the moment of our innocence, our mystic, and our wild, so that the controller isn't the only one driving the car in that moment. And so what I'm hearing you saying is that when you can be in the space of, what did you say, allowing, and allowing is a wildness. When you're in the space of allowing, you don't know quite what's going to happen. That's part of our wild nature that we get into, right? So what you're doing in that moment is, rather than asking the controller to go away and sit down, you're just like, how can I bring more of my essence into the moment so that the controller isn't taking up all the real estate in the room? Right?
100%.
And so the part of ourselves that wants to, this is where like the non-hierarchy starts to become really fun for me, because if I start to shame or think I'm not getting it, or feel like I'm somehow doing something wrong by thinking that the controller is a lower form of myself, then I'm still in the war within myself. And as long as I'm in this warring me against myself, it's hard for me to be in the becoming part of me that wants to grow and expand. So it's the ability to allow the parts of ourselves that are challenging to be there. And then if possible, how can we bring more essence in? The same way that, like, when we want to be a healthier eater, when we fixate on like pulling the sugar out, it's really hard. But when we fixate on bringing the vegetables and the fruit in, it has more ease to it.
No, I love that. I love that. I think it's where I'm at right now, messing with the diet, but you know, at an existential type of level. Have you ever, as far as the Akashic records in the field, I think what you told me last time when we were having a conversation is that you work with I'm working with big energy. So when you see that or feel that for someone, like, how do you interpret that?
So how I'm going to use you as the example player here, because it's easier for me to work like with the context than to work more conceptually. So when I go into your records, there's a lot of frequencies that are participating with you, which tells me that the more that you can release the ceiling that you put on yourself, the more like yourself you're going to feel. Whereas if I go into someone else's records and I get kind of a one-pointed frequency, like someone that I just did a session with today, I was like, you really work quite intimately with what I call the ancient ones. So this is the line of energy that kind of goes to the original wisdom teachings. And this particular individual is being invited to sit in the company of like wisdom teachings and really saturate themselves with it and see how it starts to play and dance with them. right? Whereas for you, it's a much more broad, much more I don't want to use the word freeing, because that what I just shared can be incredibly freeing for the person when they go and they tunnel into it. But for you, it's less judged, it's less contained in a box, and needs to have a lot of like pulse to it. So you would work with the ancient ones, and you might work with ascended master energy, and you might work with the space between all of these energies. You might work with frequencies from other planets if you're open to it. But essentially, the more that you can be in like the thrum of it all, that's going to serve you better than getting really honed in and focused on one particular thing and just steadying the pulse there over and over and over again.
Mhm. So when someone hears that, right, like the individual that hears you need to work with the ancient wisdom or ancient keepers of the wisdom, like how do they work with them? How do we work with them? Is it at an unconscious level, or is it how can we consciously work with them?
Well, in that particular situation, it might be that someone takes, let's say in that particular moment, they're interested in like the tantric yoga traditions that are non-dualistic. So they might just go and pick up a text and sit with some of the teachings and meditate on it and see how it relates to them in their everyday life. And then if they're in a space of, if this is potentially their vocation, if they're some sort of a spiritual teacher or mentor somewhere, they might be sharing that in the way that they're relating to people in group settings. But the thing is that, like, I don't want to lose sight of as we're having the conversation is this is what I find tricky. In order to have the conversation that we're having, the easiest way for me to relate to it is in an external way, so that we can have this conversation make sense. But just keep in mind that everything that I'm sharing is not outside of ourselves. Everything is everything, right? So if someone wants to sit with the ancient ones, they're just going into their own wells of wisdom and seeing what's there. What wants to be revealed? What wants to have my attention? What wants to speak through me? What wants to language and give support as to what my next step is? Whereas someone like yourself playing in the bigger energies, I find ascended masters to be really big energies. They're usually very strong. So this is like the energies of Jesus. So ascended masters for me are ones that have had a life form on earth. They've deceased. They've gone into the non-physical form, and that's where they're residing. And so it's working with Jesus Christ, the Buddhas, the Krishna, the the Mother Mary. That kind of energy is a very, very strong energy. That's a big energy that you play with. And you might also work with just the field of consciousness as its own momentum.
Now these
Wait, let me just say one more thing here, which makes sense to me. This is just clicking from our session. Because the way that you, correct me if I'm wrong, the way that you operate as a human is that you can cut through a lot of the bullshit that you can see in front of you, and you can see what's really needed in this moment. Now, the way that you can see that is because you have a connection to the bigger pulse. And so you can feel like this is a societal pandemic happening right now. This is a global issue taking place right now. And the part of you that wants to respond to it is aware of the reason why I'm in this form and not a non-physical form in this moment is so that I can feel the pulse of what's taking place on like a bigger scale, and I can work with it on an individual or a group level.
Well, then that's my next question is like at an individual level, how do you have, what's the effect? Like what is the effect of the individual on the collective?
Well, so if we're just going to stay with your example, can I?
Sure, 100%. Go ahead.
Okay, so then if there's a pulse within you to see how the way that men are showing up currently is not working, and there's a system that you have inside of you that you sense, feel, and know would be beneficial to many men, that's the part of you that wants to be given more freedom to be able to express itself.
Now, do we come into these lives with these plans, these pulls, this sense of purpose, if that makes sense? Like, do we come in, like, I don't know, I'm just totally just being curious here, but like if we come in and we wipe our memories and we folly through this life stumbling and like trying to figure out who we are and have these different experiences, like is it already preset? Like, do we sign some contracts, like saying, hey, we're going to work with you, we're going to work with this, we're going to work with this type of modality, like we really want to remember who we are, we really want to have purpose? Or is it like, again, I think it's probably a mix, but like, because I have these abilities, or because I came in with this energetic signature and what's unfolded at this point in time in reality, I feel that, and then I come up with my own solutions for what's going on and answer the call that's being, you know what I mean, coming from within me in the environment that I'm currently in, if that makes sense.
Right. So first and foremost, everyone gets to have their own game. So the last thing I want to be doing is sitting here and saying that I have like the inside telephone line and I have the absolute answers to all of this. That's the least of how I want to be coming across in this conversation. So what I've experienced and what can just be on the table for one to chew on and play with is that exactly what you said. It's a little bit of a mix of both. I do find that because we are energetic by nature, there's certain energies that are attracted to each other and certain energies that are repelled against each other. So I sort of feel like there's certain dispositions that we choose to come into this life form with. So potentially we might choose our parents, we might choose our color, our race, our eye color, our height, all of these different parts that make up who we are is what we choose before we come in. And they do have significance and meaning to them. And we're sovereign at the same time. So as we start to be playing in this field of this lifetime, we get to pick and choose which direction we want to go based on how the environment's playing with us and what's coming at us and what we're being received and different experiences that we're having. So I don't feel like, personally, it's more like, because I'm someone who hates to be controlled, it's like terrifying for me to consider that everything is actually pre-planned and that we have no choice in the matter. Now, is that the actual essence of my divine nature, or is that what I want to believe because it makes the human in me feel more comfortable in this lifetime? That's where I'm saying that it gets to be everyone's game. But I do feel like we are sovereign. I do feel like even when we pass on, our sovereignty stays with us. So we don't actually go from sovereign to not being sovereign. And then in that dance, in that game, we're always on purpose. Purpose to me isn't something that's static and like people have one defined purpose in this lifetime. When I was in my 20s and working as, and it's not always related to work. I'll also say that purpose isn't always vocation or career based. That's just where we like to dump it into the most. But when I was working as a yoga teacher, I was 100% on purpose. In my 20s, it would not have served me to be an Akashic teacher. I wouldn't have been able to manage that very well. And then as I grow and expand in myself, my purpose grows and expands with me. And so now my purpose and my meaning is where I'm sitting right now. And I'm watching how that's also simultaneously blending and moving into something different. So that's the other thing, is that like, I don't actually feel that our purpose is static. It's energy.
Sure. Evolving, right? It's evolving as you become, you become more, or I wouldn't say more, as you become different, then your purpose changes and it becomes different as well, right?
And then where we can kind of get stuck is like, what a lot of people find is that they're really, really good at something. So if we can align with the probability that we do have multiple lifetimes, and even though we don't have like the brain memory of whatever it is that we did in another lifetime, there's some sort of a cellular DNA blueprint that I think is in our cells that does remember the past lives that we've had. So if someone in a previous lifetime, for example, Let me just think of it. So if someone in a past lifetime was really, really good at the intellect, right? So they're really good at like understanding and being able to work with computers and have that science sort of background, that technological background. They bring that mastery into this lifetime, but that's not necessarily why they've incarnated. That mastery is pulled in from a previous lifetime, and it's meant to be a source of support and reservoir for them to pull from as they merge into the becoming in this lifetime. And what I find a lot of people do is they end up getting stuck in what it is that they're really good at, but it doesn't light them up. And it makes sense to me that it doesn't light them up because they've actually already mastered it. So why would you come back to do the same thing that you did before if you've already mastered it in another lifetime? There's no growing edge there. So what we're doing is we're kind of taking like the old cell phone that has all your stored files and photos in it. And in this lifetime, you have a new phone and you're dumping your old photos into that new phone. And then you're allowing the new phone to mix with it and create something different.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we get in our comfort zones, right? Like, you know, we always want to feel good. We always want to stay in our little container, and we always want to keep doing the same things because it's familiar. It's like outside of that is growth, right? Like it's getting uncomfortable and pushing ourselves to be uncomfortable, and then really finding out who we are and evolving and expansion and all of that, I think is important. I always tell my kids this, especially my son who's playing football for the first time this year. It's going to suck for sure, but it's like expansion of who you are. And through that, you'll become something totally different. And, which I love. I really love that whole idea of just becoming more. I say more, I mean like more and more of a like knowledge, you know, more of experience, more of like awareness of what you're capable of, even in failure. I think is an opportunity for learning and for just experiencing something totally different outside of yourself. So, I mean, I keep saying more, but I'm in actuality, I mean like a different experience of what you're really familiar with and what you're comfortable with. I've written this down because I want to ask you this. Have you, and it's like a left field question, so I don't mean to surprise you, but like, have you like asked some like hard questions of the Akashic or Akasha as far as like the origin story of human beings and where we derive from?
I haven't. No.
Come on, Heather, you got like the entire universe at your fingertips.
I think what I play with a lot. Okay, so because I do get things like this asked a lot when I'm in the trainings. Okay, there's a part like, even though I play with this field, I'm very much like enamored with the human experience as it is. So I just want to lay that out there a bit. Like I love playing with the Akashic field, but I also love the contrast of the human experience. And there's a lot of things that we get to do in this earthly plane that we don't get to do in the non-dimensional realm. So our senses, for example, right? The ability to taste sushi and to smell the petrichor after the rain and to be able to touch a loved one, like all of these things that we get to do with our senses, they're not accessible to us in the other realms. And then you can take in like time and gravity and contrast and all the other variables. So there's a part of me that like doesn't want to become so disconnected with the human realm by constantly floating in the mystical realm. There's a part of that. There's a practical component here. I'm also a mother of 3. I work full time, and there's life managing that goes on. So I don't oftentimes have the time freedom to just be like, I'm just going to go hang out and check in on all these things. There's a couple where I've sort of spent more time, and I'm also someone who loves mystery. I'll just say that, like, I love nature, but I don't need to know the names of all the plants that I'm walking through in my own forest. I love staring up at a night sky, but I don't need to know the constellations. Like I love just the place of being in the presence of it without knowing it all. And that is just part of my nature. So that's probably why I don't spend a lot of time asking the big questions like that. So yeah,
that's understandable. I got 3 kids too. I get it. Trust me.
Yeah.
Between practice and school and homework and all the stuff. Trust me. I get it. Do you need to have a ritual to tap into those records? Like, can you tap into them like, you know, just sitting here with us? Like, do you need to go through a ritual?
Well, no. Where I bring in more technique or ritual is more based on like the chaoticness of the day. So if I'm having like a regular day where I'm in a pretty good groove state, I can float in and out with no problem. But if I have more crisis and chaos, it's going to take me a little bit more to get in there because the hamster wheel of whatever's going on is going to keep gripping and grabbing and holding. But I think that's actually what I love the most about the records is prior to playing with them, when I'd meditate, it would take a good 15 or 20 minutes to get into what I call the meditation current. And since I've been playing with the records, it's very instantaneous. It's within like a minute or two that I can, or even instantly, that I can feel myself move into that field and be in it. And that's like still very surprising to me, that accessibility to access it in that way.
How do you receive information or data, right? Like, is it images? Do you see, like, do you hear?
Oh, great question. Yeah. So the four main sort of clairs that I play with when I'm working with myself or with clients is, so claircognizance is your inner knowing. That sort of comes more from like seventh chakra, just the knowing of like, this is what I'm going to be doing. Clairaudio is the hearing without voice. So it's the thought voice. That will oftentimes we'll mistaken it for a thought, but it's actually clairaudio. The difference between the two for me is that clairaudio is going to be more direct. It's going to be authoritative, a little bit more authoritative than a thought, and it's going to be quite clear. So those are sort of the ways that I can tell the difference between a clairaudio and a clair, or just like an inner thought voice. Clairvoyance, the one that's most well known and famous or infamous, whichever way you want to look at it. So that's the seeing with eyes closed. And then there's also what I would call an external clairvoyant, where you can see with eyes open. And then clairsentient. So that's the feeling of emotions or sensations. So for me, my primarily top two are claircognizance and clairsentient. And I love this because there's a lot of people that are interested in expanding and growing with their connection to source. And they assume that because they aren't clairvoyant, then they won't have as much access as someone who is. So I think it's kind of if you want to talk about predetermined things before we come into this lifetime, I actually get a sense and a feel that my soul chose consciously not to be clairvoyant so that I can reach more of the people that have doubt and resistance to playing with this because they assume that they're not going to have access to it. So clairvoyant has grown with me just by playing with this in the last 5 years. Another thing that's really fun is when, like, so if I open up your records, I'm in your energetic frequency, your GPS signal, if you will. So oftentimes, like if the person I'm speaking with is really fast by nature, I'll notice that the way that I speak is a lot faster than how I speak. If they're really slow by nature, then I notice that like it's almost like I'm, smoking a J or something. It's like a really slow way that I'm talking with them. And if
Smoking a
someone's
J.
if someone's clairvoyant, I will actually read their records through their clairvoyance. And so it gives me really good data on how to grow and expand my own clairvoyance. So I actually like total hack is I learn so much about how to access the Akashic records by being in other people's records because they're a great teaching tool for me.
So when you tapped into mine, like, what was the impression or the energetic feel or like, experience did you have?
Well, if what I remember is that when I first went in, there's a big sort of pull and a sort of a upward current when I went in, and it expanded right away. So that to me is just like we're working on a really big plane of energy, like a wide horizon line, and not something really specific. I can also like if I'm referring back to it, I remember feeling this like. Oh yeah, that's it. Uh, you have the way that your kind of current works is that because you receive so much, it has to also be released. And if it just keeps building and percolating and percolating and percolating, it can create a bit of like an internal combustion for you. So it needs to have an external outlet. So some people can be more gentle in the sense that like they can receive information, they assimilate it, they might send it back out, they might not. But for you, it's almost non-negotiable to be in the presence of being of service in the way that you want to be sharing and relating, because if you're not, there's nowhere for it to go, and it can almost it can just be released in inappropriate ways, whether it's sharing with someone who doesn't want to hear it, what you're receiving and picking up by them, or it can be expressed in frustration and anger in inappropriate ways, just because there's so much tension there and you don't know what to do with it. So there's definitely like, it's like an engine with you. It needs to pull in, it needs to assimilate, it needs to release back out, or furnace, whatever way you want to lean into it. So that's what I mean. Like, it's a big energy. And so for you to kind of make yourself small and not express, it's like self-sabotage for you.
Sure. I feel it 100%. Like I feel it. I don't know. I just in the body, 100%. Like I feel like when I can tap into, I don't know what it is. Like, have you ever felt like you're changing timelines, like energetically in your body? Like, have you ever hit resistance from the body to go into a new timeline at all?
Define for me what you mean by timeline.
Like if you feel like you're recreating your reality, right? And like you're consciously working towards something like a new result or a new reality or something, and you're starting to be pulled in that direction. So if something's happening with your body, I don't know, I felt energetically like almost like electricity running through my body, and I don't know if that's resistance or timeline shifting, if that makes sense.
I see it more, I understand what you're saying, and I see it more in the sense of like old scaffolding breaking down and the new scaffolding's building back up. So the old pattern that you used to operate from, it doesn't serve anymore. So that has to be disintegrated, and then a new way of holding yourself up has to be created. And so sometimes it's simultaneously. Like when you get what we call like a breakthrough or a download or like an aha moment, usually what's happening is like simultaneously in that moment, the way that you used to operate is being released, and the new way that you're operating from is instantaneously coming in. And sometimes it's the process of months or weeks or years for that to happen. But where I think we kind of mess ourselves up is it can be incredibly uncomfortable. And so because we're taught to move away from uncomfortable things, that when we're in the pocket of something really being uncomfortable, we try and stop it, stifle it, resist it, move it in some other way, and then we actually just interrupt what's happening. This like physical body, for me, does not get left behind on this journey. This is actually the catalyst for how you want to be growing and expanding. And when we separate from the body, or we think that the body is a lesser vehicle than the current itself, it totally messes up how we want to be expanding and growing in the way that we're meant to. So the more that we can lean into, this body has its own wisdom, its own intelligence that is separate from what we call like the actual brain of the body, and we just allow ourselves to ride the current, it's impressive what can happen.
Riding the current, you mean like surrendering to the experience?
Yeah, like there's been times when I've felt, I'll call it like an energetic upgrade. Like I've been literally woken up in the night, body paralyzed, but feeling that electrical current that you're talking about, and me being very confused as to like what is happening. And I just get this message of just be still. We're pulling out the old, we're pulling in the new. And it was literally like, I don't know if to the physical eye if it was visible, but to me it felt like my whole body was just having like a vibratory experience for about what felt like 10 or 15 minutes, could have been 30 seconds. And it was an electrical flush. And when it was done, there was like this non-negotiable message that came through. And I was like, okay, this is the new way that I'm operating from. Now that's a very dramatic experience. That's not usually how it happens for me. And I will say that the ones that are kind of slower and more integrated are exactly that. They have a more long-lasting energy to them. They're not as glorified because we're just so used to the fireworks in our society to be impressed. but they have that residual energy connected to it that makes the new pattern very long lasting. Whereas sometimes when it's intense, it can be brief and quick and you can hold it for a week or a month, but then you kind of lose it.
Well, how does your reality change when these things happen, like when you get these upgrades?
It changes the reality in the sense that it's another sort of reminder for me that I limit myself with what I think is possible. And so how can I just ask the internal question, is that all that's available in this moment? Is there more information that's available to me? For like, it can be something as simple as like when I lean into my most expanded experiences of what love feels like, there's a part of me that wants to sit in the this is what love is. And then there's another part of me that's like, what if there's more? What if there's more than the way that you've experienced love? When I've played with yoga nidra, which is like a yoga of sleep, is how it's described. It's a deeply, deeply resting experience. You're lying on your back and you're listening to an audio, and it's taking you through the layers of the body into relaxation. When I have a cap or a ceiling of what I think rest feels like, and then I get dropped into another layer of rest where more programming can kind of be dismantled, it changes my reality in the reminder to stop limiting myself with the experience being the endpoint of what that frequency feels like.
Do you think we grasp too much to others' experiences? Like when we listen to these podcasts and we listen to books,
For sure.
we set up markers. We set up markers for ourselves that, I don't know, because of this person experienced that, so I'm not experiencing that, so it's not right. I'm not doing it right. Like, do you get that when you're teaching your students, like, to tap into the Akashic field, records, whatever, past life lives, or however you want to term that? Like, do they get these preconceived ideas of what it looks like and what it should be?
Well, that's probably the biggest work that I'm doing when I'm working. So what I love about working with a group is that when you're in a group space, someone's going to bring forward a topic that on the surface you weren't thinking of, but as soon as you get into it, it's actually like it's teasing out a lot of things that you have for yourself. So that's what I love about a group experience, is the you are me and I'm you experience. And one of the biggest jobs that I'm doing the entire time is managing how much people are comparing themselves to others. So when we go out and we do, like, I'll give them an exercise that they go out into breakout rooms and they're doing something, and then we come back into the main hub and we're debriefing. Someone's going to be like, yeah, it's just crickets when I go in there. I'm not hearing anything. I'm not seeing anything. I'm not picking up anything. And then the next person's like telling you an entire movie of what happened in a 10-minute exercise. And so what I'm managing is how much we're comparing our experiences to each other and not allowing our own experiences to happen. Full disclosure, I intentionally chose to live in a very small town that has a lot of distraction-free energy. I don't put a lot of audiobooks on and podcasting during. If I'm going to listen to a podcast, that's what I'm doing, is listening to the podcast. But in most of my activities when I'm moving throughout the day, to the best of my ability, I'm allowing the way that nature wants to dance with me permission to come in and play in the unique signature way that it dances with me, rather than trying to experience it from someone else's experience. But it's not easy to do. And so the byproduct of that is I have a very small circle, right? Because there's a lot of distraction that's around me. And you know how it is. You got 3 kids. You are still in the experience of watching a sporting game and being around. Like, it's not that I'm not around people a lot, but the actual like chosen people to be around versus like the situations that I'm in that just makes it so that I'm around people, it's very different.
So when you're at the sporting games, do you ever drop in knowledge from the Akashic field?
What I try and do in the sporting games is, so for example, last November, I went on retreat with someone, had an absolutely epic time. And when I came back, I was experiencing that sort of after the ecstasy, the laundry, right? So you've had this very transformational experience, and then you're going back into what some might call the mundane life. What I'm trying to play with in those sporting events is like, how can I bring the feeling and the sensation of that retreat experience into this experience right now? Um, so for me, my daughter plays volleyball, so it's fluorescent lights, whistles, sneakers, and a lot of screechy teenage girls running around, and then a lot of parents having an opinion of like who should be played and who shouldn't be played. And so when I went into like our like provincial experience, I was just like, okay, what do I want to bring? I want to bring in more celebration because that's what we were doing a lot of on retreat. And so, to the best of my ability, I just led like, how can we celebrate these girls and what it is that they're doing that's so amazing rather than pointing out what's not happening. And so, just by bringing that current in, it created a very alive moment when we were cheering in the bleachers. It became much more communal. And then I even took it into, because what I can also like I get challenged with is like the team dinners that we have to do on tournament weekends. And so when we went into team dinner, I was like, I'm done just having the conversation of like chit-chatting about kids. So I just brought like this super fun game where I was like, okay, we're going to play 3 questions. And so any 3 questions that you want to pitch to anyone at the table, and when they receive, they can either choose to answer it or not. But the wildness of the question asking became just as fun as like listening to the answers of the people around me. And then I got to know these like 12 parents in a way that like for the last 3 years I didn't know any of them. So I try and just bring like what do I want to be experiencing more in this moment? How can I bring more love, more aliveness into the moment, and how can I contribute to it? But the side effect is when you're always the one who's bringing it, I require a lot of solitude to recharge.
Hmm. Yeah, the retreats, going and experiencing that and then coming back to ordinary life, I feel it can be challenging for many different reasons, but for me, it seems like, and we had a discussion, it's like plugging back into the matrix almost. Like you've had this experience of being depulugged, unplugged, and you're kind of tapping into your essence a little bit more than what you would be. Like the distractions aren't really there. And I mean, if you're on a retreat, you're doing a whole bunch of different things that are like self-care and really tapping into that essence of who you truly are, and then coming back to that. I can 100% relate to that feeling. For me, it was like almost resistance. Like when I came back from California, it was like I had communed so much with Mother Nature that I was on the same vibe with her. I was really vibing, and like I was communicating with her, and I was just really feeling great, like just this deep connection. And then I can remember the first day back here trying to plug back in. It just, I couldn't feel her anymore. Like I couldn't feel her. I felt like I had to, I don't know, get ready for the work week and everything that, lies ahead during that. And it just felt like a resistance. Like, I don't know. It was like somebody had turned on the cortisol, like, uh, spigot. And all of a sudden I'm like, can't fall asleep because I'm getting anxious about the day before. And it just seems like, when we try to replug back into the matrix, it's like, that isn't like who we truly are or what we are. It's like we're forcing ourselves and there's a resistance there. And, it's like it takes vacation for us to like really connect with that, reconnect with that, or retreats like what you're planning in, let's see, your website, 2024, 2025, different exotic locations that, draw that essence out of us. So, you know, after saying all of that, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the part that I find most what I find most personally challenging when even if I'm leading retreat or on retreat, and even just the bubbles that I'm in my work, like I'm just very blessed in the sense that I love what I do, and so I do get to have very potent experiences like this conversation that we're having right now on a regular basis in the office. But the part of me that's challenged when I have the retreat experiences, there's something that when someone does a retreat well, there's a felt sense that everyone just wants the best for everyone. Like, I just want the best for you. I don't like, keep me posted. Let me know what happens after this because I literally just want the best for you. And when I find I get plugged back into what you're referring to as the matrix, and I agree with that languaging, that's the part that I think I get most disappointed in, is that it's hard to feel the desire for wanting the best for the other person. From the school ground drama that takes place to the adult drama that takes place, like somehow that gets lost. And that's the part of me that I think I'm playing with quite intimately, is how to hold that, not hold, but just have more of those moments of wanting the best for each other on a daily basis. The other thing that I think that you're bringing forward, which is really important, is I wrote down here in my notes, watch the practice. So I remember listening once to someone who's super famous with a lot of the neuroscience that they've done with meditation and whatnot. But I remember listening to how he was describing that because he meditates in this particular way on a regular basis, the amount that he can get done in a day has amplified tenfold. And there was a part of me that was like, wow, that's really fascinating. And why does it have to be like that? So where I like to watch the practice is the part of me. So what I was noticing in the suburbia environments was same as you, like nature's my God kingdom. It's absolutely the place where I can feel most connected to God, is when I'm in nature. And so growing up in suburbia, I was constantly finding myself doing certain austerities and practices to feel like I did in nature. And then I reached a point in my like early 20s where I was like, screw it. I'm just going to move to where nature is, so this doesn't have to become a constant for me, right? The same way that so so that's the place that I got to, where I was like, how easy can it be? Do I actually have to be constantly doing this particular spiritual practice in order to feel this way? And this is the part where I think a lot of us are kind of maybe missing part of the relationship with our spiritual practice. If we have to drink the green juice every day and take the vitamins every day and meditate for 2 hours at a time and bodybuild for 4 hours and do all of these different practices just to feel like ourselves, what the fuck is happening? That's how much is required just to feel like yourself. And so this is where I slightly encourage like releasing the practice to see how much energy is pulling us in the opposite direction, so that maybe we start to make some different lifestyle changes, right? So and the way that you're describing, like with your, your regular 9 to 5, and you're like, I don't even know if I actually want to work with my um, entrepreneur practice in this environment because it's such an uphill battle. And so maybe I want to be taking what it is that I have to offer into the masses of people that are already online with it, and they just need like the tools and the skill set to be able to expand it within themselves. So I don't want to be working with converting. I want to be working with amplifying. And that's a really important part for us to know within ourselves. I am not equipped to work with the trauma side, and I am so happy that there's so many people working with it. And when people have done a lot of that integrative work and they're ready for like, how can I grow and expand from here? This is where I love to work with people from. But from the ground base crisis, this is not my jam.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's, one, it's powerful that you can be aware of that. And then two, it's like, as a leader, how do you delegate some of that work because you're not the expert in that. I think that for me, that's probably one of my strong suits is like, understanding my weaknesses, but also figuring out what I'm good at. And then just really, again, going back to, our comfort zone, just hammering that a little bit. And then I don't know, I think there's a lot of power in delegation. For sure. And, I really enjoy these conversations with you. I think I've learned so much about myself just in our reading that you gave me and, just furthering that in this conversation. And the last question that I want to ask you is like you talked about like our future selves already being there, like being this potential of energy, like already like structured or, when you get to a certain point or when you're working on like a project, or if you're working on a timeline or whatever, like that future possibility already exists. And so it's like bringing that into this reality. Like, do you give people tools to help bring that individual aspect in themselves into this reality, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I'll just ask what are the action steps that they can start working with in this moment. And, to any of the listeners out there, one of the key components I find is that when people are wanting or desiring something for themselves, they hold it in the expanded viewpoint of the bigger picture a little bit too much, and tunneling it into, okay, like what are the action steps that I can do in the next day, week, 10 days to help to move me in the direction towards. And that for a lot of people is that can be more challenging than actually dreaming big. So some people just need to hold the dream. They need to give themselves permission to imagine and visualize and dream and go back into that childlike innocence of where they used to just imagine whatever they wanted and weren't really self-conscious of how it would appear as it came across to other people. And others are excellent at that, and they have the big picture going on, but then teasing it and paring it back into like, okay, so in the next week, what am I doing that's leading me in the direction towards? And some people, it's like, man, you're just putting out too many newsletters each week. Like, you don't need to be putting out a newsletter every week. Take those 2 hours a week that you're doing for the newsletter. Let your newsletter be bi-monthly or monthly even, and start to put those couple of hours that you're doing for your newsletter and put it in the direction towards, okay, I need to develop this skill set and to be able to do what I'm doing, or I need to be reaching out to people that I think would be interested in this offering that I have coming forward. But it's very easy to stay in the big picture and not pare it down into the action steps.
It feels good, right? Like going
Yeah.
outside yourself into the quantum and like envisioning that and working that and working that and working that and just really getting fine, in the details, like really magnifying that. And then, oh man, now I got to come back to this place, like this 3D reality, this dense place, and then like really try to figure out, because it, like, I don't know, like, has a manifestation ever turned out like picture perfect to what you imagine it to be, or is there always like slight imperfections to that?
Oh, it goes both slight imperfections, but also beyond my wildest imagination at the same time. Like, um, where I like to play with it is like there's three sort of buckets that I lean into with like sort of my play with how I'm showing up. So one of those buckets is vision, like being able to visualize what it is that you want and being able to hold that visualization longer than the point that feels comfortable. So a lot of us will be able to titrate into the expanded state, but if we don't feel worthy to be in that expanded state, we'll kick ourselves out very quickly. So if you're comfortable and then the 30-second mark comes in of that visualization and it starts to become really uncomfortable and you get distracted with like, oh, I got to go cook dinner or whatever it is that you're going to be doing, see if you can hold that for another 30 seconds. And that's the vision part that you're playing with. The second bucket is your actions. What are the action steps so you are a part of this 3D realm? You have to be in action to take that abstract concept, that vision, and densify it enough to be able to be put into this three-dimensional realm. So there's action steps that are needed. And then third is the mindset. So how are you talking to yourself? How can you redirect the conversations when they lead into you can't do that because, or we're too busy, or we're too tired, or all the different ways that we distract ourselves with our mindset. So for me, when I'm playing with my business or myself and something feels off, I'll look into those three buckets and I'll see which one needs more attention. And it's not that they're all held in equal component all the time. That's not a reality. But if I'm doing a lot of visual and I don't have a lot of action step, that's where I'm going to place my attention. Or if I'm doing so much action that I'm friggin' exhausted, then I need to go into the meditation current and hang out there a little bit more. And if I've got those two parts working well, but I'm constantly self-sabotaging with the way that I'm speaking to myself, then that will need my direction. But those three buckets are what I'm just constantly coming back to. Okay, this isn't working right now. If it's not working, okay, maybe I got to change my strategy, my actions. Maybe I need to spend more time in solitude, meditating, visualizing. Maybe I need to call Trey and have him cheerlead me for the next 5 minutes and tell me what an amazing person I am so that my mindset can be shifted. Right?
Call me up. Call me up. I got your back. We can smoke some J's.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
Heather, I love this conversation. I love our conversations. How can people work with you? How can they contact you? How can they find out about the next retreat that you have up?
Easiest way to hang out with me is to just go to my website. It's just my name, heatherivany.com, Ivany. There's everything from free, right? You can play with all the things that are free on there if you just want to get to know me a little bit more. I always have an Akashic training on the horizon. You can do a session with me. And yeah, I got some upcoming retreats. I got 3 spots left in November. Would love to have those filled. Yeah, it'd be great to have anyone who feels called to hang out. Yeah.
Sure. Heather, I can't thank you enough. This has been beautiful.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate the time and energy you take.